A common question that we get from our customers is, which fountain pen is best for, insert the name of a high maintenance ink there. Which pen is best for Bay State Blue or whatever. So I collected some brain thinkings and I settled on some solid pen recommendations for high maintenance ink. But first, what even is a high maintenance ink? Well, the three most common categories of high maintenance inks are pigmented inks, shimmer inks, and sheening inks. Pigmented ink. This is a fountain pen ink with a physical pigment in liquid suspension rather than a liquid dye, which is what, conventional fountain pen inks are. It's like putting flour in water. The flour itself doesn't actually dissolve all the way, but it stays there in suspension. What makes it high maintenance? Well, for starters, it's not as fussy as some of the other ones on this list, but the viscosity of these inks can be a little different than dye-based ink, which would be a new variable in terms of how it flows through your pen. Since these inks contain physical pigments, they can leave behind some sediment after sitting a while. This could contribute to clogs and make the cleaning process a bit more laborious. These inks are usually made with the intent of permanence, not necessarily a visual feature like the other two I'll mention, and usually pigmented inks are more of a utility. Okay, shimmer inks. These are just like regular inks, but with glitter. So what makes these high maintenance? Well, the glitter particles don't stay in suspension for long. Let's say that pigment inks are that Orbitz drink from the 90s in liquid suspension, right? Shimmer ink is high pulp orange juice. Orbitz, not going anywhere. Orange juice pulp though, when you shake it, it's ready to go, but it quickly settles. You can agitate your pen to stir up the particles in your ink reservoir, but that glitter still finds places to hide in your feed, which could lead to clogging. Sheen. This is ink that looks shiny. When it dries, a top layer of sheen kind of separates from the rest of the ink to give the surface a super cool and colorful shine at certain angles. What makes it high maintenance? The sheening dyes of this type of ink are notorious for clinging to fountain pen beads. Heavy sheeners have a lot of dye. It's what gives them that unique look, but it also makes them flow differently. Usually these tend to dry out faster than more conventional inks. So, should you just never use any of these inks? Heck no, go for it! In fact, Organic Studios Nitrogen is one of the craziest sheening inks out there, and it has been one of our top sellers for years, despite its infamy. So, I know I couldn't stop you even if I wanted to. What I'll do instead is introduce you to 3 pen partners that I think will dance nicely with even the most cantankerous of fountain pen inks. The first pen I'm going to recommend is the dedicated pen. This method is simply you choosing a high maintenance ink and assigning it exclusively to an affordable pen. This has been a popular method of dealing with wild and crazy inks for a long time, and perhaps the most popular pen for this is the Platinum Preppy. The Preppy is very affordable, which means that if one day you decide to just be done with it, you can. You certainly can clean it. I'm not advocating for you to treat this pen as a disposable pen, because it's not. But sometimes just knowing that you do have the freedom to just cast something into the phantom zone and be done with it, it makes trying a crazy ink out a little less intimidating and risky. On another note, the Preppy's cap seals really well. So with sheening inks that are prone to drying out, this is a helpful asset. Now, you can buy a converter for a Preppy, but they're pricey. So I would say that if you're doing a pigmented or shimmer ink, sure, try the converter, because that particular converter is actually really easy to disassemble and clean. However, if you're going to be trying something packed with dye and prone to staining, Bay State Blue, best not permanently stain your fancy expensive platinum converter. If you're going to make this your Organic Studio Nitrogen or Bay State Blue pen, I'd recommend refilling a cartridge or converting this pen to an eyedropper by using some O-rings and some silicone grease and just filling up the whole thing. At that point, you might as well choose a blue Preppy too, because it'll be blue whether you want it to or not. Some other potential dedicated pens could be the Pilot Kakuno or a TWSBI Go. Both are less than $20 right now. The second type of pen that is well suited for dancing with unruly ink is the Maintainable pen. I have chosen to call it Maintainable because I seem to struggle to say disassemblable. TWSBI pens are a great example of pens that were manufactured with user serviceability in mind. Pens like these that you can completely take apart make them a great choice for shimmer inks because no matter where those little glitter bits choose to hide, you can find them, like Liam Neeson. The only downside is that the feeds are a wee bit fragile. When you pull these out, make sure you don't grab them right at the fins. Instead, grip the nib and feed at the sides as far back as possible. That should be fine. Once your TWSBI is disassembled, you can use some pen flush and a toothbrush and get all the parts 100% clean. Flush and brush. I like that. Most of what TWSBI offers are clear pens with large ink capacities, so you can clearly see when your shimmer particles have settled in your pen. This is something that always helps give me a visual cue to remember that I need to constantly be spinning my pen so that A, the shimmer bits don't settle into a sad pile of pizzazz, and B, my writing maintains an evenly distributed amount of shining, shimmering splendidness. In addition to TWSBI, it's also fairly easy to fully disassemble small batch made pens by companies like Edison or Franklin-Christoph. Speaking of which, the final type of fountain pen that I think is a great choice to co-pilot your favorite drama queen inks are pens that have easily replaceable parts. So the pens I just mentioned, Edison, Franklin-Christoph, are some good examples of very simple pens as far as construction goes. They have a nib and feed from Jowo in Germany, which is one of the most prominent nib manufacturers in the world. It's easy to afford and buy a new nib unit that will thread right into these pens, or you could just get a new nib by itself. The other notable part is the converter, a standard international. Again, very common, affordable, accessible. If you stain that converter beyond salvation, no big deal. If your feed becomes eternally bonded with Organic Studio Nitrogen Sheen, no worries. Those two pen parts are the only pieces in regular contact with your ink, and you can very easily get new ones, which is not only handy for replacing parts, but you can also keep a nib unit and converter separate as a dedicated setup specifically for those fussy colors. There are many small businesses that make acrylic pens like these brands, and any of these will be just fine in terms of the user-friendly replacement part situation that I've been talking about. I'll list some additional brands in the video's notes for you. Apart from these small batch pens, there are some larger brands that have easily replaceable parts as well. The Conklin Durograph, for example, a $60 to $80 pen that looks great and allows you to write with a wide variety of additional nib units. This pen also takes the same international converter that I mentioned, and TWSBI pens are also a solid choice, offering separate nib and feed units. As far as which nib sizes are best for showing off properties like shimmer and sheen, the broader the better. More ink on the page means a faster flow, and that's usually a good thing to keep things moving, ink flow wise. Plus, there's just more cool looking ink on the page that you get to enjoy. It's also a good idea to write with these sorts of ink often. None of the ink types I've mentioned here are ideal for leaving alone for a few months. However, if you do, following these tips should help you be slightly less frightened when you do have to clean it. Check out Goulet pens for all sorts of gear for your writing adventures, and thank you for joining me.